Are you responsible for marketing in your organization? If so, you probably know the importance of getting the most out of your budget in order to prove the value of your marketing through actual return on investment. Hammer Time is here to help make that happen for you. I'm your host, Mallory Ham, and this podcast is designed to bring you answers to the questions I'm consistently asked by business owners and marketing executives. Tune into each episode to hammer into the topics that will help you maximize your marketing plan's performance. In this episode, I wanted to discuss a topic that affects just about every digital advertiser out there, but it's something that very few know a lot about. So today, we're going to be talking about machine learning. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try to pretend like I know anything about AIs. I want this podcast to actually be helpful to you guys. So we're going to be switching things up this episode and bringing in our very first guest speaker to the Hammer Time studio. Please join me in welcoming Amber Bandukwala. Amber,
hey guys.
Thank you so much for being here today. I'm so excited to have you on the show and have another human to talk to rather than just myself.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me, Mallory. It's great to be on. Just to give you a little background on me, I work at an ad tech company called AdTheorent. So we're a demand side platform, programmatic platform. And yeah, my whole entire career has been within the advertising digital landscape. I worked on the agency side for a little bit, doing all the media planning and buying. And then about 6 years ago, shifted over to the demand side platform and have been at AdTheorent ever since.
I feel like last time I saw you, we talked about how our paths and career paths are so similar. We both started as media planners and buyers, quickly realized that was way too much detail for us to manage. And then pivoted over to the sales side of things.
Yep. I was like, I think somebody else would be better at Excel than me. So I'm going to go ahead and let somebody else do that and find something that I can be better at. Yeah,
exactly. Amazing. Well, first off, before we hop into the thick of things, I think it's important for us to ensure that listeners understand what programmatic advertising is before we even begin breaking down how it's affected by machine learning. So to kick things off, can you first kind of just dive into programmatic advertising and kind of define to the listeners what it is?
Yeah, of course. So when we're talking about programmatic, really what that means is the use of an automated platform to purchase media as opposed to purchasing through traditional channels, which would be more manual. So, an example of that would be buying directly with like a New York Times. There's several benefits to purchasing media programmatically. The first and probably most popular reason would be just the cost and time efficiencies. Secondly, you get this wide variety of inventory to have access to. So when you're buying, directly, you're either buying through a couple different platforms or a couple different sites, which really only offers you so much scale against a specific audience. It's just a little bit more limiting. Whereas when you're purchasing programmatically, typically, you're buying that through a DSP, which is a demand side platform, and they would be integrated with several exchanges, which are essentially just where inventory is being held, and then have access.
Auction. Sorry to interrupt.
Exactly. So they have access to all of this inventory and can kind of pick and choose where they want to be serving. With that, you get opportunities to more effectively target your audience at scale. And then, in addition to that, it just gives the media planners transparency and control over their media buys, which everybody wants to know exactly how their media is running, where it's running, how it's performing, have that ability to go in there themselves and shift things around to optimize performance.
One of my favorite things about programmatic that I like to talk to prospects about is the level of control that you can exert over kind of the branding around your campaign. So you can exclude harmful topics, exclude your ads from showing up next to harmful topics like terrorism, drugs, gun control, all those icky things you don't want your brand to be associated with, which is something that you might not always get with a direct buy unless that's something that's built into your contract.
Right.
Another thing to highlight about programmatic is it is a cross-channel platform. You can buy ad space, video ad space, audio ad space, text ads, native, connected TV out of home. There's really no limits to what you can do with programmatic, which I think offers a really awesome environment to have that cross-channel, multi-channel approach with one vendor, with one platform, which makes it, like you said, just cost and time efficiencies are so much better in that sense.
Totally. And on top of the efficiencies, just from a reporting and attribution and performance standpoint, being able to allow your individual digital tactics to be working together and to be informed by have your CTV data informing your display data, informing your whatever else you have running, is going to make a huge difference in your performance and just the insights that you're able to gather, because you can start to understand how users are engaging, throughout the funnel. I know that's like we're going to be very buzzword heavy, I think, today in general, but that's super important, right? Like those things shouldn't and don't need to be operating in a silo. Like those tactics can be working together. And as we see programmatic continuing to evolve into like digital out of home and CTV, those capabilities are just becoming so much more robust and, just a really effective way to run campaigns.
So now that we understand what programmatic is, let's talk about how AI and machine learning are being used in the programmatic space. So to kind of kick this off, why don't you just get started with defining AI, because it's another big buzzword I feel like that's thrown around a lot.
It totally is. And before I even jump into that, I will say programmatic doesn't always necessarily mean that AI or machine learning is being used. There's a lot of different ways to activate campaigns programmatically. Again, some more traditional methods would be contextual targeting, layering on audience segments, geofencing. Those are all tactics that you can incorporate in programmatic, and it doesn't necessarily involve any use of machine learning. So the difference between that and machine learning, which we'll get into, there's that common form of purchasing media programmatically, and then there's this AI-powered machine learning side of things, which is what we're going to focus on today. So if we look at AI by definition, it's definitely more of an umbrella term. So any kind of machine that's mimicking a human function falls under that umbrella of AI. So for example, vision AI would be like, your facial recognition on your phone or something like that. Vision AI can actually also be used in the programmatic space. So there's partners that leverage Vision AI to, for example, scan a page and align your ads with images that you want to be associated with. So that would be essentially an AI-powered contextual targeting strategy. Other forms would be natural language processing, which is like your Google Translate. Speech would be another one, which would be like your Siri or Alexa devices. And really, like the main takeaway here is that AI is just extremely broad. So it's not enough to say that your platform is using AI. It's like that could mean that's like me coming, like when someone asks me what I do, it's like I do advertising. Like,
right.
That doesn't narrow anything down. Like that's very broad. So, I think it's always important to ask your platforms if they are leveraging AI, what form are they using? When we talk specifically about machine learning, which if you are working with a programmatic partner that's leveraging AI, I would say outside of, the few that leverage Vision AI, the other most common form would be machine learning. So if we look at the definition of machine learning, that is specifically that is a type of artificial intelligence, and it focuses on the development of computer systems. And then it has the ability to change over time as it's exposed to new data. So of all the different forms of AI, machine learning is the only form that actually can evolve as it's exposed to new data. So like, if we're going back to the analogy of mimicking a human function, machine learning best can be compared to the brain. So just like the way a 2-year-old would respond very differently to touching something hot than a 10-year-old, that's exactly how machine learning works. So it is always important to understand how long a platform has existed, because the way that platform is able to process and understand and leverage data is going to look different depending on the maturity.
So let's dive into that a little further. What are the distinguishing factors between different machine learning platforms? What are the differentiators that are setting them apart? You mentioned, how long they've been around is one of them.
Yep. There's a lot of different forms of of machine learning. And I would say outside of how long a platform has existed, another can be how is that data being leveraged? So for the most part, any given programmatic partner, if they're using machine learning, they're getting hundreds of data signals in real time to decision on whether or not to serve an impression. And the way that data can be used very, very differently across platforms, or the way that data is used is very different across platforms. So, for example, a platform can use that data to establish an audience, to build out an audience. So, an example of that would be like lookalike modeling. So, understanding, all right, this is the type of audience that we believe or that we have seen convert in the past. So we want to identify people that fall into this audience bucket. So that would be one form of machine learning and how those algorithms can function. Another form would be actually activating that audience. And when I say activating that audience, really what I mean is predicting on an outcome. So as opposed to just identifying whether or not someone falls within that audience that you're looking to reach, the distinguishing factor there is going beyond the audience and understanding, if we were to reach this person, what's the likelihood that they will take an action that's meaningful for us on this campaign? So that looks very different from campaign to campaign, from advertiser to advertiser, depending on what your goals are. But in terms of that specific platform, that's going to be, that's an important way to distinguish between different DSPs and how they're working for your campaign. Another would be how that platform is optimizing. So a platform can optimize based on learnings across everything that's running on that platform. So for example, at any given time, there's probably thousands, millions of campaigns that are running at the same time. So there are platforms that would use all of those learnings across every campaign to optimize your campaign. So if CTR is performing on these specific sites, or, that's a very simple example, but across across these other campaigns that are running, then that's how they would optimize your given campaign. The other way that optimizations can work are campaign specific. So only taking into consideration what is working and what is not working on your individual campaign and optimizing that way, as opposed to leveraging entire, platform-wide optimizations or, performance patterns.
Do you find that one is more effective than the other, like platform-wide versus campaign-wide?
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to depend on what you're trying to accomplish, and if that KPI or if that whatever it is that you're measuring is a little bit more surface level or a little bit more in depth. I would say generally for surface level KPIs like CTR, VCR, just like your general media metrics, it probably isn't going to make as much of a difference. I think, and I might be a little bit biased here because the way that AdTheorent optimizes is very much based on individual campaigns. And for me, I think the importance there is just that the way that people behave across verticals are very different. The way that you behave with media, if you're in market for a car versus about to go to the grocery store and engaging with some kind of with Tyson or something like that purchase funnel, that's just very different. The way that you're engaging, the time that it takes to move from awareness to consideration to whatever, it's a different process. So when I think about campaign optimizations, I would want to make sure that the campaign that I'm running and the people that I'm trying to reach and the engagement that I'm focused on is specific to our brand, to our audience, and not being based off of something that's working well on a totally irrelevant brand.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and you're spot on in what you're saying about how, the marketing funnel is so different cross industry. I mean, even within the same industry across brands.
Right.
So I totally see what you're saying, how, you might not get that level of granularity with a platform that is harnessing, all the data across all of their clientele to kind of figure out what's going to work best for you. There it is.
Right, exactly. And that kind of brings me to my next point too, with just the idea that the way that machine learning will work best if it's being customized to your specific campaign. There's a lot of general kind of the off the shelf machine learning models that can be used. You can click a CTR model and that is built out, ready to go. It'll just start optimizing towards CTR. But more often than not, from my experience, there's typically not just one metric that is important. It's typically not just CTR. It's typically not just driving people to site. A lot of times campaigns are much more complex than that. So you really want to be able to get a little bit more custom with your approach and, ideally have a team that is focused on building out a custom model for what you're trying to achieve.
And that's a lot of what you guys are doing at AdTheorent, right? Each campaign is getting their own custom built model algorithm that's only focusing on your data and maybe even some extra data in your industry to drive those multiple metrics forward.
Right, exactly. And that's why, when I'm meeting with my partners, it's just a good question to be asking your other DSPs, because it doesn't mean that there isn't a time and place for other methodologies to be used. It's just that a lot of times machine learning gets put into this bucket and, there's not necessarily this understanding for how these different platforms are operating and the benefits that they can offer you if you use them in the way that they're best can be used. But yeah, I think it's a good question to be asking your other partners, is just, if you're leveraging machine learning, how are those models being built? Because it's just important to distinguish between those different platforms and how they can best be leveraged on your specific campaign. There's oftentimes room for more than one machine learning platform on a campaign. It's just understanding how they're operating and what the benefits are of each.
This is great. My very first episode of Hammer Time, we talked about things to look out for when choosing the best marketing vendor, just a general thing. And now you're giving us some extra information about how to choose the best programmatic vendor for your needs. So
yeah,
way to just ride this wave with me.
I know, right? It's in a space that's so overcrowded, it's confusing. I remember being on the agency side and meeting with all these partners, and it was trying to distinguish between one versus the other was a nightmare. So I think as a vendor or whatever, it's our responsibility to be able to give our partners the information that they need and the questions that they should ask to really help them better understand what's going to make the most sense for them. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our partners are successful, and whatever that is, that's going to benefit all of us. And, I think that slightly, I'm going to pivot a little bit from there, because I have one last thing that I always just like to, again, challenge my partners to ask, is back in the realm of optimizations, is that platform that you're working with optimizing just on incremental learnings or both incremental and decremental learnings? And what I mean by that is, in terms of how data is passed back to you, for example, if you're optimizing towards a site or an on-site action, you would receive in real time whether or not that action occurred. And you also receive in real time if that action did not occur. And really, both of those learnings are important. And an optimization needs to occur regardless of whether or not that action occurred, because it's, there needs to be an adjustment, right? Like if we're talking about machine learning and the way that predictive works, there was a prediction that this person would take this action. And if they didn't, then there needs to be an adjustment to the algorithm.
Right.
So that's just the last thing that I like to throw out there as a good question. It's a good way to differentiate between platforms and just understanding how they're optimizing.
So just to kind of break that down further, put it even further into layman's terms, it's kind of the difference between, someone made a conversion and they exhibit X behavior. So now we're going to go after all of these people that also exhibit this behavior. That would be like an incremental learning. Where decremental is, this person didn't convert, and it's because they were in this location. Maybe it's not a location that's close enough to our store. So now decremental learnings are taking that information and saying, okay, well, let's not waste our money on any of these people in this location because they're probably not going to convert either.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it, because I do think that makes that concept much more tangible. I will say it gets so much more complex than that, because it's not necessarily this person converted, so we want to look for anybody else that follows this pattern, because it does change on an individual basis. And that goes back to even why we rely on machine learning in the first place, because we can't make generalizations about audiences. That's just not the most efficient way to, one, be optimizing, and two, just to be taking advantage of the data that we do have. Like when you're thinking about how much data is available, the ability to customize the way that you reach each individual is there. And it's not possible to do that manually. Like it's just not possible. It would take forever.
Yeah.
Just
a lot of data analytics.
Ridiculous.
Right
Yeah. Don't sign me. If I couldn't handle like Excel, like that would be a whole different level of detail that I would not want to analyze. But yeah, I think that alone puts into perspective why we rely on machine learning, why it's become such a buzzword, and it's become this popular form of targeting, just because it automates that whole process for you. You don't have to rely on your own math skills or the ability to be optimizing on every second for every individual, when a machine can do it for you.
Absolutely. So I hate to bring this up and stress everyone out, but I do think that we need to address the elephant in the room here, which is the dreaded death of the cookie. Marketers all over the world have been absolutely freaking out about it because it's still so unclear how this new generation of internet is going to affect their marketing and reporting efforts. So talk to me about how the death of the cookie is going to impact machine learning and programmatic as a whole.
Yeah, love to talk about it. I remember when this was first announced back in, I think it was like 2020. And it's like in the midst of chaos in general, you throw that on top of it. And it was like the emails that flooded my inbox. But, there's good news here. And that's with machine learning, you're not inherently reliant on any individual data signal. Like I said before, machine learning is taking into consideration 100, 200, 300 individual data signals. A cookie is one data signal. So when you take that away, that doesn't limit its ability to leverage all the other data that we have to calculate an outcome. Because again, at its core, this is math. It's leveraging this data and calculating the likelihood of an outcome. So that's really not impacted. The things that are impacted by the loss of cookies would be attribution and retargeting. And again, the good news there is that there's a lot of solutions that are going to be put in place before those are, officially removed. So what that looks like would be typically an API integration. So you can work directly with Google to get integrated within that API, and then you would get that pass back of data in terms of audiences and devices that are taking actions on that site for you to attribute to media and then also retarget. So not impossible. It does add another layer. It just, I think we'll just have to think about when we're planning, taking that process into consideration and making sure that we're prepared. And that is, again, on each individual partner to make those integrations. So it's always good to know, like, how involved are your partners in this process? Most of them probably are. We've now had 2 years to prepare for this. So like, it should be fine. The other things to be weary of potentially would be third-party data segments. And again, not that these will go away, they will just look different. And there's a lot of different forms or like solutions that are coming into the marketplace to essentially replace the cookie. Mm-hmm. The most popular one would probably be Trade Desk has an ID, an identifier, and a solution that they will be releasing that will essentially do a similar thing as the cookie did. So it's like we're taking out one thing and we're putting in another, but in a whatever multi-billion-dollar industry, it's like, what do we expect? So, but I think in general, though, those audiences and the way that third party is being leveraged will just look different. I think in the meantime, because it'll take time for those to ramp up a bit, I would recommend finding other solutions outside of third party. But again, if you're leveraging a machine learning platform, third party can be tapped into, third party audiences can be tapped into, but it's not necessary. You don't need that to reach your audience. And that's the biggest takeaway here, is that you're not relying on any of these external integrations to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. It's not like, I've seen the other extreme where people are not just freaking out about the release of or the removal of cookies, but they're like, all right, we need to push all of our money back in traditional, or back into traditional, or back into like contextual targeting. And it's like, we don't have to take a step back in how we've progressed as an industry. We just need to shift our mindset and put a little bit more trust into these machine learning platforms that they can accomplish what you're trying to accomplish without you layering on 100 third-party segments to reach a specific audience.
Device IDs, IP addresses, they're about to have their moment. I feel like
that's exactly right. And that's the other thing. There are, that brings me to another point too. There are still third-party solutions that aren't cookie reliant. So, for example, if anybody's working in the pharma industry, partners like Crossix, Purple Lab, MedData, those things are not cookie based. So those won't go away. No concern there. Similarly with like CRM data and anybody using like LiveRamp to onboard those data segments, not cookie reliant. So those things aren't impacted, which is great. That's another form of integration and on like targeting that you can apply without any impact.
Well, I mean, it's kind of just going to bring first party data also back to the forefront where it rightfully belongs. I mean, hopefully this kind of forces companies to take their customer data more seriously in terms of how granular they're getting, not only around their demographic and their audience data, but how customers are engaging with the brand and what the output of that engagement means to the brand. Things for like, lifetime value of customers, all of that good stuff. Harnessing that data to go after an audience that reflects your most profitable customers. And that's something that I'm honing into prospects and clients all the time is first party data, collect as much of it as you possibly can. And I think, the death of the cookie is only going to help drive that home even further.
Yeah. I mean, it really just, that's the direction that the industry is moving into, being more privacy first. So it's just important to be taking that into consideration when you're looking at your media mix as it is now. Are your partners compliant with, with all of the regulations that are currently out there? And what type of data are they currently using to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish? Because you really want to make sure that there's no sensitive PII data being taken into consideration, just because that's where the problems come in. And I think making sure that your data is anonymous is the biggest key here. We want to respect people's privacy, but at the same time, I'm like, do I really care if I'm being tracked? I'm getting a lot of good shopping ads. Like, I don't know. You can go ahead and follow me.
I bought a skirt
Follow
on
my
Instagram
cookies.
yesterday. I won't lie.
Like, you're going to get the ads anyway. So I go back and forth. I'm like, I mean, would you rather get ads that aren't relevant to you?
No, I don't need ads for chainsaws and things like that. Like, give me the stuff that I probably don't need, but I might want.
I don't know. I started to get some humbling ads for what seems to be like an adult diaper situation, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, guys, calm down. I just turned 30. Like, okay,
we're not worried about incontinence quite yet.
I know. No, we're not there. Thanks for being proactive, I guess. Get me loyal to the brand before I'm there.
The AARP ads are coming right after that. Just wait.
Gosh, I can't. It's going to give me a midlife crisis.
Well, this has been an awesome conversation around programmatic, machine learning, AI, all those crazy buzzwords we hear all the time. But I think you kind of took the buzz out of them today and really showed us how we can harness machine learning to affect change in our campaigns and to optimize our campaigns and to make our budgets as efficient as possible through all of these different platforms and these different offerings that are on the programmatic scale. So thank you so much, Amber, for joining us today. I think this has been really informative. For me, at least, if no one else got anything out of this. So I'm really appreciative that you're able to join us today.
Yeah. Thanks so much again for having me. Hope it helps. I think as long as we continue to ask these questions and be challenging each other in this space, it's only going to make us all better. So always happy to take some of the mystery out and, lift up the curtain, show what's being done, explain it a little bit more, just because that's going to help us all be smarter planners,
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again, and tune in next time, everyone. We'll be hammering into another very important marketing question. Thank you all for joining me on today's episode of Hammer Time. We've got many, many more important marketing questions to hammer into together. So if you like what you're hearing so far, please be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube. Catch you guys next time.